My name's Rob, and you may know me from a Twitch and YouTube channel called Slant Alpha Adventures. Our captain for this series is Max, who you may know from a YouTube and Twitch channel called Citation Max. On behalf of Max, of VAT USA, and myself, welcome to our flight across America. In previous episodes, we covered choosing an origin and destination, creating a route, filing your flight plan, obtaining your clearance, briefing for your departure procedure, and taxiing out to the runway. Let's resume now as Max is about to check in with the tower controller.
American 503, Denver Tower, on departure, RNAV Kidding 1050 at 5, runway 8, clear for takeoff.
RNAV Kidding, clear for takeoff, runway 8, American 503. Alright, so we're EPKI 7 departure. That is good there, and always good just to have this ready to go. Alright, let's go.
Notice that the tower controller included in the takeoff clearance RNAV to Kidding. Let's talk about what that means and why it's included. First of all, not every airport does this. Certain ones do, and it's ones where pilot nav departures from multiple departure runways are in use. The tower controller needs to verify that you've selected the correct runway in your FMC, because as you can see on the EPKI 7 departure, having the wrong runway in will send you to the wrong place. So if your takeoff clearance includes the phrase RNAV to Kidding, you look down and you see that your first point says GIST, you know something's wrong and you need to clear up that disagreement before you advance the throttles. Side note, we mentioned this in our previous episode, but as a reminder, if you're on a radar vectored or a hybrid departure, you're not navigating directly to that first point right now. You'll have a charted or assigned heading to fly off the runway, and then you'll expect vectors from the departure controller to join your route.
Again, Unicom is departure, so that's 122.8 per our ACARS message. Strobes coming on. Lights coming on. There we go. Alright, so here's what we want to do a runway check, runway 8. That is our departure runway. That is verified and checked here on our MFD. Start the clock. Terrain on. Let's go.
Now let's take a moment to appreciate those awesome engine sounds.
Stable. Takeoff. Flex 50 SRS runway autothrust blue.
Yeah, 647, welcome to Denver, exit left unable ground, it's going to be 121.85.
80 knots.
Turn left over to ground, United 647.
V1. Rotate. Nice and smooth. Okay, we got a positive
Denver
rate.
Tower, hello, Southwest 2305, coming up on 8.
Okay, we're looking to intercept that course right there. We're just following the flight directors.
American 503, departure 120.35, see ya.
12035, American 503. Have a great night. Alright, 12035. So that's a bit of a change there, guys. Unicom to 2035. So it's good on the, we're moving, things are happening. Get that autopilot on here when things get busy. Alright, 2035.
Oh, hey, in our previous episode, Max had said that the departure frequency was going to be 122.8, where VATSIM pilots coordinate amongst themselves when ATC isn't online in that area. VATSIM ATC staffing can sometimes appear in the middle of your flight like that. Later in this episode, we'll talk about ways to keep tabs on what controllers are available.
Departure, good evening, American 503, 8,100 climbing via the EPKI 7 departure. Close.
American 503, Denver departure, radar contact, climb and maintain, level 230.
Climb and maintain, flight level 230, American 503. Alright guys, so the air traffic controller just said climb and maintain level 230. Those words mean that we no longer need to comply with the restrictions on the SID. So we're going to go 230 open climb.
When you check in with a new controller, in this case the departure controller, you always want to give your current altitude and the altitude that you're climbing or descending to. In this case, Max described his target altitude as climbing via the EPK-7, and in the case of a departure procedure that has a series of altitude restrictions along it, that's a shortcut for naming off all of those restrictions Max is going to meet along the way. So instead of him saying, I'm going to stay at or below 10,000 at Kidding, at or above 14,000 at Apu, at or above 15,000 at EPK, and will level off at flight level 230, Max just says, I'm climbing via the EPK-7, and that means the same thing.
Alright, we're above 10,000 feet here. Let's go lights coming off. Wings coming off. It's always these click spots that look funny. There we go. We'll keep the seatbelt sign on here for a little bit. And we are on our way.
Now, Max just mentioned how in the U.S. an instruction to climb and maintain a certain altitude cancels any other restrictions that a procedure might have imposed. And the same is true for a descend and maintain. However, be careful because speed restrictions do still apply unless you're told otherwise. One really interesting and somewhat unusual situation is when you're climbing out of Chicago, either the O'Hare departure out of ORD or the Midway departure out of Midway. Those are both radar vector departures. Both of them include this instruction in the notes: maintain 250 knots until advised by ATC. Now, just because you've been given a climb and maintain, even if that takes you above 10,000 feet, where ordinarily you can go ahead and speed up at that point, this 250 knot restriction does still apply. It's important to notice that your FMC is not going to automatically do that, so you as the pilot will need to intervene there and put the plane in a mode which will comply with that instruction. And generally speaking, it's just good to keep in mind that the autopilot and the FMC are there to help the pilot, but they're not to be the pilot. Your job is to comply with the controller's instructions, and sometimes that means changing what mode the autopilot is in order to make the plane do what you've just been told to do. But I digress. Let's get back to Max.
So there's a couple different ways it could go here. Our next frequency could be Unicom, or it could be center.
American 503, contact Denver Center, 127.65. Good night.
12765, American 503. Have a great night.
You too.
All right, 12765. So always a trick here. Frequencies, there's a lot of numbers, a lot of stuff going on. Always a good thing I like to do is, just as a trick, as he's talking, kind of start going down here and start turning and twisting the knobs here. Denver Center, good evening, American 503, 15-9, climbing at flight level 230.
American 503, Denver Center, climb and maintain flight level 350.
Maintain flight level 350, American 503.
Max just mentioned his cruise altitude of flight level 350. In most places in the U.S., if you're traveling eastbound, you'll want to file an odd number times 1,000 as your cruise altitude, and if you're westbound, an even number times 1,000. If you mess that up, normally your clearance delivery controller will catch that and correct it with you, but if they don't, oftentimes your center controller will. It's not a big deal either way, but it does save them some workload if you get it right from the outset. So remember, if your overall direction of travel is between 000 and 179 degrees, file an odd number 1,000 as your cruise. And if it's from 180 to 359 degrees, file an even numbered 1,000.
All right. 35, always want to verify. 35,000 feet is set, and we confirm that here. 35,000 blue, 350 blue. So that's always just a good double check. Anytime you select an altitude, really important to then verify that's actually what you have set.
Denver Center, good evening. American 313 is on the ground at Eagle County, IFR to Miami.
All right, so here, guys, we're above 18,000 feet here. So any airplanes in Class A airspace, that's anything above 18,000 feet, we're going to go standard.
To explain what Max just said in a little more detail, he talked about switching from local to standard altimeter when passing 18,000 feet. When you're on the ground and you take off, and before you climb through the transition altitude, and then again after you descend past the transition level, you should keep your altimeter calibrated to the local altimeter setting, which the controllers will often give to you over the radio. This ensures it's as accurate as possible in reference to things like the ground, terrain like hills and mountains, man-made obstacles like buildings and radio towers and such. When you're above that transition altitude and before you descend back through the transition level, it should be set to the standard altimeter setting of 29.92. That ensures that all aircraft cruising at that level are using the same setting regardless of where they took off from. Now, a lot of beginning sim pilots do know this, but what a lot of beginners do tend to get wrong is that this ties directly into whether you're at an altitude or a flight level. When you're at an altitude, given in terms of thousands and hundreds of feet, 3,500, 2,000, and so forth, you're also saying that you're below the transition and you're calibrated to the local altimeter. If you're giving your height in terms of a flight level, you're also saying that you're above the transition and you're calibrated to the standard altimeter. Outside of North America, the transition altitudes and levels are often much lower than we're used to here, so you do occasionally hear things like flight level 120, and that's totally legit. But in the US, you should never hear a flight level of less than 180. It's not just cool guy pilot speak for giving your altitude, it has that additional meaning of saying that your altimeter is set to standard rather than local. So don't say flight level unless you really mean that.
Denver Center, good afternoon, Gold Strike 1872.
Right now we're in the
level 210 direct rifle.
ZDV RTAC,
Gold Strike
ARTCC.
1872, Denver.
You can see we're kind of
proceed direct to the
until
north,
probably at least
maintain
another
flight level
200 miles or
400.
so. And then
Direct
we're going to go
Donor up
into
to flight level
Kansas City
400,
airspace.
Gold Strike
I always like
1872.
this, kind of, it gives you a real situational awareness of saying, hey, this is where I am.
United
This
771
is who I
radar
should
services are
contact.
terminated.
If
Frequency
Denver
change
Center's
approved.
online and I'm in Denver Center's airspace, hey, I should give these guys a call, or girls. But if I'm in Kansas City airspace, hey, I shouldn't call Denver.
Denver Center, hello, Southwest 2305.
And then we're heading our way
17,500,
into
flight
Fort
level
Worth Center there.
230.
So
Southwest 2305, Denver, climb maintain.
always
flight
kind of
level
helps, and I think it's really cool
390.
that they have
Climb
these
to flight level
charts.
390, Southwest 2305.
When you get to cruise, this is a great opportunity to check and see how VATSIM ATC staffing may have changed around you. Maybe the next center over was offline when you started your flight planning, but perhaps they're online now. In one of our previous episodes, we mentioned SimAware, but since that episode was released, there's now a newer VATSIM activity tool called VATSIM Radar, and the URL of map.vatsim.net now connects you to this one instead. There's also a desktop app called VATSPY, which I like very much, even though it's a little older, like me. Plus, you can also just peek at the nearby controller list in your pilot client. The other thing that you can do at cruise, usually, is get ATC's permission to step away from the cockpit for a few minutes. If they don't have any sequencing or spacing that they need to do with you at the moment, and you're not about to be handed off to the next sector over, they'll usually approve you being away for a few minutes of a stretch break, or to refill the beverage, or visit the little pilot's room, or what have you. Just don't step away without permission, and don't forget to check back in once you're back at the wheel. In our next episode, we'll start briefing the arrival and approach procedures into Dallas Love. On behalf of Max and VAT USA, my name's Rob, and thanks again for joining us for our flight across America. Talk again soon.
West, northwest of Eagle.
Awesome.
Gold Strike 1872, let me know when it smooths out. You're the first report I passed.
Started at 310, smooths out at 340.
All right, narration for take I don't know. Los Tres.